Hi, and welcome to Visionary Evolution, the second presentation in my series. My name is Anthony Lamb, and I'm a fine art photographer. Today, I'll be taking you on a visual journey through my photography career, from my education and early influences to my evolving use of colour, composition choices, and the progression of my style. You'll also see some of my earliest work taken over 21 years ago, and I'll share the stories and reasoning behind each one. Before we dive in, I want to thank everyone who watched my first presentation video, Behind the Lens. The feedback I received was more than I ever imagined, so thank you all for your time and support. I've always been drawn to the arts. After studying at art college, I completed a BA in furniture and product design. Photography came into my life as a mix of passions and experiences. As a child, I was fortunate to travel to extraordinary places, the European Alps, North Africa, and the Scottish Highlands. These trips fueled a fascination with wilderness and solitude, and a deep appreciation for uninhabited landscapes. Pairing that love of nature with a passion for minimalist art and design led me to pick up a camera in 2003. My intention? To document the outdoor experiences using a simplistic interpretation of the landscape. I'm sure many of you have come across this quote before: less is more. It was popularised by the renowned Bauhaus designer Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who believed in stripping back design to its essential elements. This minimalistic philosophy influenced much of modern architecture and design. I first encountered this quote while studying art and design history at university, and it's stayed with me ever since. Though it's a familiar phrase today, the mindset behind it has become a guiding principle in my own photography, embracing simplicity and restraint to create stronger, more impactful imagery. Influencers were vital in shaping my early work. I gravitated toward photographers like Ansel Adams, Michael Kenner, and Nick Brandt. Their mastery of tone, simplicity, and the art of dodging and burning was inspiring. Black and white photography, in particular, stripped away distraction and emphasized emotion, drama, and the photographer's personal connection to a scene. Here's one of my first images, taken in 2004. It's a portrait of a lone young bull standing firm in the fading winter light of Buckinghamshire. I used dodging and burning to enhance the contrast between light and shadow, a technique I was experimenting with at the time. That same year, I photographed Rannoch Moor in Scotland, with Black Mount looming in the background. I hesitated to take this shot because the location had already been photographed countless times. But by processing it in black and white and carefully working the tones, I aimed to capture not just the scene, but the serenity and emotional connection I felt there. Another image from this period is of the jetty at Derwent Water in the Lake District. I aligned my composition using the two posts as anchors on the horizon, only for a ferry to dock and a young girl to spill water across the jetty. What felt like a ruined composition turned out to be a blessing. The water created a beautiful leading line, guiding the viewer into the frame. These images aren't representative of my style today, but they lay the foundations of my craft. Photography is about practice, experimentation, and constantly pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone. Without that, there won't necessarily be growth. In 2005, one of my photographs won a UK national competition with Practical Photography magazine. The prize? A low pro rucksack, which I was thrilled about. I analysed why this particular shot succeeded where others hadn't, and there was one word: simplicity. The image led the viewer's eye effortlessly from the S-curve path to two people tossing stones into the sea, then to the burned out pier of Brighton. The textures, leading lines and layered elements made the scene visually engaging while remaining uncluttered. In 2011, I began exploring urban environments more seriously, where towering cityscapes and modern design became my subjects. One early morning I captured this long exposure shot of Dubai Marina. The skyscraper is perfectly reflected in the calm water, a rare moment of stillness that added to the drama of the image. To demonstrate the impact of dodging and burning, here I've compared this photograph to a basic black and white Photoshop conversion. The difference is striking. Dodging and burning gives full control over highlights and shadows, allowing you to create depth and emotion that a one-click edit simply can't achieve. This period of experimentation led me deeper into architectural photography, where I focused on structures like modern bridges and brutalist designs. One favourite subject was a striking bridge with bold lines and deep shadows, ideal for long exposures. Capturing it was a challenge due to frequent wind disturbing reflections on the water, but patience paid off. Eventually, I achieved the calm conditions I'd hoped for, resulting in a crisp, dramatic composition. Eventually, I was drawn back to landscapes and wilderness, inspired by my roots. One stormy morning in the UAE, I ventured into the Arabian desert to photograph dunes in rare conditions. I wanted to challenge the typical warm, sunny imagery of the desert and create something unexpected. In one image, a weathered tree stump resembles a cat, framed by dunes and a moody sky. Another shot captures a solitary tree, framed by dune layers, adding depth and minimalism. Rather than look down the leading lines of the dunes, I decided to turn 90 degrees and shoot across those lines, providing layers and a different depth approach to the image. One photograph in particular marked a turning point. When I converted it to black and white, it lost its narrative. The sand resembled snow, stripping the image of its context. Switching to colour restored that sense of place. I realised that colour wasn't just aesthetic, it was storytelling. This became a key part of my style, using colour intentionally to enhance minimalism and narrative. At this stage of my journey, I began revisiting the artists who had inspired me in my early years. Painters like J.M.W. Turner deeply influenced my approach to photography. His ethereal work with delicate layers of colour and a soft rendering of landscapes invited viewers to feel the scene rather than simply see it. That sense of atmosphere shaped how I began using colour in my own imagery. Another influence was Paul Cézanne, particularly his painting The Turning Road. When asked if it was finished, Cézanne replied simply, yes. His expressive brushwork brought vibrancy and emotion to his work, which I wanted to emulate through photography. Mark Rothko also played a significant role in shaping my compositions. Though his colour-filled paintings might seem deceptively simple, Rothko pioneered a style that was deeply original and evocative. His simplistic horizons inspired me to experiment with minimal, bold compositions that convey emotion through subtle tone shifts. Captivation is one of those works influenced by Rothko. While exploring the desert landscape, I crested a dune and immediately saw a composition forming. A storm brewing on the horizon and a small shrub nestled in the sand. Using a long lens, I compressed the layers of dunes and waited for the right moment. As the clouds thinned, soft, diffused light bathed the scene, giving it a studio-like quality. I clicked the shutter. Another shot came from almost nothing. 4 trees perfectly aligned in the desert. At first glance, the scene felt too sparse to photograph, but I decided to stop. Lying low on the desert floor, I used a telephoto lens to bring the distant dunes closer, adding depth and intrigue. I later learned the trees had aligned themselves along an underground stream, nature's own design. These desert photographs marked the first time I began curating cohesive collections. I developed a principle I now call flow. Imagine walking through a gallery. Each photograph tells its own story, but the editing style, tones, and narrative don't tie them together. Inconsistent editing across unrelated subjects can confuse the viewer. Flow creates a unified, immersive experience. By carefully editing the first image in a collection to match a preferred aesthetic, I use it as a template for the entire series, carrying its saturation, tonality, and overall mood through every photograph. This approach allows me to create collections that feel like a single, cohesive visual journey, rather than a set of disconnected images. By 2018, I was producing work that reflected the painterly aesthetic I had been striving for. To achieve this look, I combined techniques such as a long exposure technique captured in camera, graduated filters to control highlights, shooting in overcast conditions to achieve soft, desaturated tones, simplistic, carefully balanced compositions. The result was a refined style, evident in my photograph Illumination, taken on the south coast of the UK, where all these elements came together. I began seeking out subjects that were easily overlooked, off the beaten track. One example was a stark chalk cliff face scattered with rocks, leading the eye out to the infinite horizon. On a calm day, this scene might have been unremarkable, but in stormy conditions, with waves crashing and mist spraying on my lens, the photograph came alive. I realised that embracing challenges and immersing myself in the elements made me feel nature rather than just observe it. This connection became part of my artistic process. Not every impactful image requires dramatic weather though. A simple photograph of a fisherman's boat perched high on a mound of shingle uses a simple gradient sky as a canvas, while contrast and minimalism tell the story. My approach became about solitary subjects and reducing distractions, isolating objects in a scene to create emotional resonance. Through careful use of tone, colour and composition, I aimed to give viewers a sense of calm and connection to a place. At this point, I recognised that weather conditions, subject choice, composition and palette were the foundations of my photographic style, but the stories behind the images became equally important. For example, my series Paradise Lost, photographed in the Maldives, was inspired by a conversation with a local fisherman. He told me that rising sea levels were eroding outer reefs and flooding lagoons, endangering entire islands. Knowing that these landscapes might disappear in the next 20 to 30 years gave this body of work an emotional depth I hadn't anticipated. In 2019, I had the idea to build a collection of images that included architecture. I had already studied and researched areas of northern France, and I knew that some of the master painters who had influenced my earlier work had also visited this region. I began my process of researching locations along the Normandy and Brittany coastlines, focusing mainly on man-made structures scattered across these rugged shores. My trip was planned for 2020, but like so many things that year, it had to wait. Once the dust settled, I set my sights on 2022. I knew this was going to be a big undertaking. Long days, endless driving, and miles of walking. I packed light to keep things manageable and maximise the number of sites I could explore. In March 2022, I finally set off for northern France. The weather was exactly what I'd hoped for. Storm systems rolling in from the North Atlantic, waves crashing against the rocks, and a moody sky that set the perfect stage for minimal, dramatic compositions. One of my favourite moments was finding myself alone at a lighthouse, with no one else around. I had free rein to shoot a simple, head-on composition, emphasising the walkway as a leading line that draws your eye straight to the structure. Not all my photographs were planned. One of the most memorable images was an unexpected find. A tiny stone hut perched on the edge of a cliff, surrounded by giant granite boulders. The coastline of Brittany felt raw and weather-beaten, with granite rocks covering almost every square foot of land. Another surprise came while walking a coastal path to my next marked location. I happened to glance out toward the ocean and noticed two rocks, side by side, appearing as if they were in conjunction. These rocks may have once been one, split apart over centuries by harsh weather. I titled this photograph Embrace. To me, it looked like two lovers frozen in time. Some images from this series were heavily inspired by Mark Rothko's abstract art. Two photographs in particular feel like visual opposites, a yin and a yang. One features light sand, the other dark, and placing the horizon dead centre gives both images an abstract, painterly quality. The simplicity of these clean, minimal scenes creates a visual sense of calm and balance. Moving on to 2023, my style feels more settled. My use of colour, composition and weather conditions has become a way to tell a cohesive visual story. That year I travelled to the Isle of Harris and Lewis in Scotland, a trip I'd dreamed of for years. February in Harris gave me the gift of solitude, empty beaches, raw wilderness and an overwhelming sense of calm. I've titled this collection Still. In a world where constant motion has become the norm, the art of being still is fading, often mistaken for laziness or isolation rather than the vital act of self-care. This collection offers two layers of stillness. An invitation. Each image captures a fleeting moment of calm, inviting viewers to pause, breathe, and immerse themselves into the serenity of the scene. Many photographs were created using long exposures, minutes spent in quiet reflection, allowing me to absorb the landscape rather than rush through it. Still is a meditation of presence. It reminds us that stillness is a luxury, yet one that costs nothing but time. Now, take a moment to sit back, breathe, and immerse yourself into the images from this collection. Simplicity, for me, can be pushed to the extreme, almost to the point where the subject becomes barely recognisable. One image captured during a desert dust storm transformed blowing sand into a natural painting, blurring shapes and lines. Another, taken on the coast of the Isle of Lewis, stopped me in my tracks. The raw file looked almost like a Turner watercolour, with its soft tones and diffused light. Finally, an image I titled Next to You depicts two rock formations contrasting against softly lit distant islands. Taken on a desolate beach on the Isle of Harris, this scene embodies everything I love about Scotland's wild landscapes: untouched, serene, and timeless. In conclusion, this journey represents more than just images. It's a visual story of my evolution as a photographer. It traces my path from early inspiration to my growing love of nature and minimalism, and how studying black and white tonality gave me a deeper understanding of colour. Over time, I've embraced new influences, experimented with techniques, and learned the power of flow. How to create collections that feel cohesive and harmonious. Photography is a lifelong journey of learning, experimenting, and finding your voice. My hope is that these images inspire you to slow down, embrace your creativity, and most importantly, stay true to your own artistic vision. Never stop practicing, never stop learning. Make it your journey, your creation, your story. Thank you so much for watching this presentation. I hope it inspires you as you head out with your camera on your next project.